And to make all of this happen took us over a year of work. There are people in the room who were very, very important to this. Linda Bjorkman, she's the lady who writes the grants. Tom Blank, he's the history guy who brings in things like the blue maps on the walls. The ones that are framed are originals. They are towboat and steamboat maps from the 1930s. Chris Baltasak in the back, he has been in history from about 1976, 1978 on. He's one of the longest members. His mother is in the audience. Trish Foreman, she's down here. She's helping to edit a book written by Chuck Sunday, and she's been instrumental in a bunch of this. Tracy Franick, she is not with us today. She's a Merker in the Merker family from Merkerville Park. I see Captain Lee Hendricks is coming in just to make sure we let him in the door. He'll be with us in about a month. Joe Harley Glavitz, he has been here fixing things, fussing things. He cleans. He does whatever is necessary. Tim Ball.
Good to see you.
Again,
You got a good audience.
I'm
impressed.
Steady worker, Jessica London. She has brought it to life. Errol is running the camera in the back. Errol's been working with us for 3 years and has scanned thousands of photos for us. Susan Metcalf is home in North Carolina. She's another member. Kathy and Tom Haas, both are very important to us, at least Block. Someone who keeps me financially stable. My wife does that in my regular life, but here at least. And so we've been very lucky. And we've gotten better, and what has happened is that we have had 20-some businesses in Prescott who now support us every year. For just $50, that keeps our doors open. The donations are important. There's somebody in the room who came and said, we need bigger screens, and all of a sudden, 3 days later, the 55-inch screens showed up. And small towns are built of us. And when we all work together, we can do amazing things. So, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to introduce you to Dr. John Anfinson. To me, he's probably one of the preeminent river historians in the nation. Him and I never get anything done because we tell stories continually. I've been reading his stuff for 20 to 30 years, and I think you'll find his talk today on Henry Bosse fascinating. And his slides will show on both of the big ones. And so without further ado, Dr. John Anfinson.
Alice, thank you. As someone who sits on a number of nonprofit boards, I can't tell you how important people like Dallas and all you are who make this happen, especially for history. So thank you for all you do. And so I'm going to jump into this talk. If you hear me cough a little bit, I'm like at the end of like a 3-week cough. Has anybody had that cough? It drives me crazy. And now the allergies are adding to it. So I will get through this. But in 1989, I received a call from Mike Connor, a Washington, D.C. antiques dealer. He called me because someone had offered him $20,000 on the spot for a large album they had that contained 169 blue oval photographs of the upper Mississippi. They were taken by Henry Peter Bosse, a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers draftsman, and the photos dated from 1883 to 1892. I was then the St. Paul District historian, so he called me because he wanted to know, did anybody know of any other Bosse albums like this one? Because he had already been offered $20,000 for the one he had. Connor's album once belonged to Major General Alexander Mackenzie. From 1879 to 1895, Mackenzie commanded the Corps' Rock Island District, where Bosse spent most of his career. Mackenzie would move on to become the Chief of Engineers from 1904 to 1908. That's the top position in the entire Army Corps of Engineers. I knew that our office had these black and white prints of the photographs he was describing. They were in these 3-ring binders and those vinyl sleeves back to back, so you could flip through them back to back. But I'd never seen the album from which the original album from which the black and whites had been taken. Connor and I continued to talk, and on one of those calls, he pointed out a detail in the frontispiece, and so I pulled the frontispiece image out to look at it more closely. Hidden behind that image I pulled out was a photo of the leather cover of the album from which our photographs had been taken. On it were embossed these words: "Views on the Upper Mississippi River presented to U.S. Dredge William A. Thompson by Mrs. William A. Thompson." The Dredge Thompson was at that time the St. Paul District's principal dredge. And William Thompson had joined the Rock Island District in 1878, the same year as Bosse, and spent the next 18 years with him there. I immediately called the head of operation and maintenance. I figured if anybody knew if that album had ever been on the dredge, he would know. And he said, yes, it was still there, but the dredge was working downriver. So I let him know that it was worth at least $20,000. And so when the boat got back to the Fountain City Boatyard, we got the album off the boat, and I brought it up for the history archives. The St. Paul District copy proved to be nearly identical to the one in Washington, D.C. The St. Paul album contains 136 11 by 14 cyanotype prints, and cyanotypes are like architectural blueprints. The album had probably been sailing with the Dredge Thompson since the time of its christening in 1937, and there was not a coffee or donut stain on the whole thing. It was in great shape. We subsequently learned of albums at the Rock Island District, the Dubuque County Historical Society, and the Mayo Foundation in Rochester. Shortly after we discovered our album in St. Paul, Connor brought his to Swan Auction Galleries in Manhattan. Denise Bethel, their head of photography, was astonished, she said, by the artistic quality of Bosse's photos. And this image of Queen's Bluff shows why. In this image, I wish I had it right next to me, what you can do is you can follow that bluff top down, and it comes to the man out on the sandbar, and you can follow the sandbar up to the man, and the man's head is right at the horizon line. And you have to look how carefully at these photographs that Bosse is setting them up very intentionally, very artistically. Because the glass plate negatives were 11 by 14, you can really peer deeply into them. You can really see a lot of detail. And the brim of the man's hat here in this image is even level with the horizon. The only problem is he couldn't get the dog to hold the stick level, or he'd had it complete. Bethel moved on from Swan Auction Galleries to become the vice president of photography for Sotheby's Auction House. She told Connor that Bosse's album ranked among the top photographic collections she had ever seen. Connor placed his album with Sotheby's to be sold at their fall 1990 sale. Sotheby's valued the album at $40,000 to $60,000, and it sold for $66,000. And I moved our copy from my archives into the district's safe. A New York dealer brought the album, but he sold most of it quickly to Charles Warenberg, a San Francisco art dealer. In the book Warenberg published on Bosse's photographs, he wrote, "One day in 1990, while leafing through a Sotheby's auction catalog, I came across a photograph that riveted my attention. An old cyanotype. It was a blue oval that seemed to float on the page like a bubble. The cyanotypes were part of an album depicting the Mississippi River. I had never heard of the photographer, an unknown named Henry P. Bosse. The images simply spoke for themselves. I had to have it, and that, of course, cost me a small fortune." Warenberg then called me shortly after the Sotheby's auction, and he said the photos that he had were worth far more than $66,000. He claimed that he could sell those photographs that day for $650,000, and they'd be worth double that in time. Affirming Warenberg's optimism in Bosse's talent, Mary Foresta, an expert at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American Art, called Bosse's photographs incredible, fantastic, and truly extraordinary. That no one knows Bosse, she said, is surprising given the quality of his work. This image of Minneaska provides another example. Look at how he sets this up. The man on the end of the bar is in line with that church in the church steeple, and then he balances a big dark area on the upper right with the big light area on the lower left. Sotheby's further elevated Bosse's stature in 1995 in their spring 1995 catalog, celebrating their 20 years in photography. And they picked the best discovery of each year. And for 1990, they took Henry Bosse's photographs. Among the most exciting moments at any photographic auction, it said, are the ones in which a high price is paid for the work of someone who, until the auction, is completely unknown. Bosse's photographs provided such a moment. His sumptuous blue studies, the catalog raved, awed everyone who saw the album in the auction preview. Raising Bosse's acclaim further, the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles produced an exhibit in a book entitled Photographers of Genius at the Getty, and they included Bosse among the geniuses. Bosse's images are now in the National Museum of American Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, the J. Paul Getty Museum, and other museums and galleries around the country. 2 books have been published on Bosse's photographs, one by Warenberg and the other by Mark Newsel, who was a professor at St. Thomas University. Most of the images from Newsel's book come from the Mayo Foundation album. In her foreword to Newsel's book, Mary Foresta, who had become the Smithsonian Art's first curator of photography, wrote, "The photographs are the result of both keen observation and romantic sensibility. His photographs," she remarked, "are as concerned with his aesthetics as they are with information." And in their exhibit catalog entitled Cyanotypes, Photography's Blue Period, Nancy Catherine Burns and Christina Wilson say, many fine art photographers use the cyanotypes really to proof their prints before they made a black and white. But they add Fred Hollanday, Arthur Wesley Dow, and Henry Bosse, all represented in this catalog, created cyanotypes with subtle variations in tonality that resonate poetically. This 2016 catalog demonstrated how recognized Bosse had become as one of America's premier photographers. Want more proof? That album I took off the dredge is now valued at $5 million. If I'd only known. This suggests that the Mayo Foundation album is worth the same, or maybe even more. The University of Minnesota gave that album to William Mayo as a gift when he retired from the Board of Regents. The Regents obviously knew about the Mayo's boat and their love of the Mississippi River. And I could say more about this U.S. Embassy catalog for Oslo, Norway, if anybody wants to know more at the end. I trust I've established that Henry Bosse's photographs are really important from an artistic perspective. But as a historian, I'm impressed by the story they tell of the Mississippi River at the edge of a profound transformation. They chronicle the first systematic effort to recast the Mississippi River into a commercial highway. They present the river's working boats, the snag boats and dredges like the General Barnard. They show the timber industry, steamboats, log rafts, and milling centers that dominated the upper river's commerce during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They illustrate the railroad and wagon bridges carrying the river's competition and whose piers offered obstacles as dangerous as any offered by the river. Bosse photographs the cities and towns along the Mississippi River that are just taking root on its banks. And he documented the river's landscape like no other person from the 19th century. Together, Bosse's photograph comprise a rich essay on one of the world's greatest rivers. Bosse was not a photographer, at least not officially. He was a draftsman and a cartographer. He crafted the first detailed continuous map of the upper Mississippi River. Before I move on to more of Bosse's photographs, let me yank you back to the present for a moment. I want to remind you of what the upper Mississippi River looks like today. Knowing what it looks like today will help you understand the river Bosse photographed better. 29 locks and dams now manage the upper river for navigation between Minneapolis and St. Louis, and they've turned the free-flowing river into a series of reservoirs. The locks and dams represent the last in a series of major navigation projects. Bosse's photographs capture the first one. Why did the Mississippi River, the great river, need any work to make it navigable? What was the natural Mississippi River really like? Uncounted side channels, backwater snags, sandbars, and wide shallows characterized the natural river. During low water, which usually occurred during the late summer and fall, there was no continuous deep channel. As the Corps of Engineers would later document, the average depth over the sandbars from the Twin Cities to Prairie du Chien in southwestern Wisconsin was about 18 inches, or 16 to 20 inches. In 1820, Henry Rowe Schoolcraft comes down from Fort Snelling all the way to Prairie du Chien, and he said he hit sandbars without number. He was in a birch bark canoe. From Prairie du Chien to near St. Louis, the low water depth over the bars was only 2 feet. The folklore that when people once waded across the entire Mississippi between here and St. Louis is true. You could have done it. If you were a steamboat pilot, which channel in this photograph would you take? Now looking at this map of the natural river near Alma, Wisconsin, think about your choice. On this map, the areas in dark blue had a channel of at least 3.5 feet. Those in light blue had less, in some cases only inches of water over the sandbars. As you can see, there's no continuous dark blue line, no continuous channel in the river. By choosing the wrong channel, you would have grounded your steamboat hopelessly. Hundreds of islands divided the natural river, dispersing it into countless side channels and backwaters. In 1805, Zebulon Pike became the first American explorer to ascend the Mississippi River, the upper Mississippi River. He quickly learned about the river's many islands. To Pike and other novices, every island meant more side channels, detours, and dead ends. Only 15 miles above St. Louis, the many islands began annoying and often delaying Pike. About Prairie du Chien, he complained they were never clear of the islands. In 1835, George Fanshawe, a geologist and adventurer, claimed that only mosquitoes outnumbered the number of islands in the Mississippi River. Sandbars and islands rarely sank steamboats, but snags, trees that had fallen into the river, could. Frequent and treacherous, steamboat pilots classified them. Sawyers swayed back and forth with the current. Preachers bowed in and out of the water. Planters lodged themselves in the river bottom and could skewer an unwary pilot's boat, as could sleepers which hid right below the surface. On September 2nd, 1852, Julia Stardina's boat passed the steamer Danube, which she wrote had just been snagged and was sinking above her lower deck. Dina's boat rescued the passengers. If sandbars were the most common obstacles, the rapids of the Mississippi presented some of the most difficult and dangerous. Skeptics doubted that steamboats could get over the Des Moines and Rock Island Rapids. The Des Moines Rapids extended for 11.3 miles upstream from present-day Keokuk, Iowa, in extreme southeastern Iowa. Through this reach, the river had worn down its bottom to smooth rock all the way across over the previous 120,000 years. No definable channel ran through the rapids, making the cataract treacherous during low water. It was at these times that the larger boats had to stop, and they would have to transfer their cargo to smaller boats, a process called lightering. The boats that scaled the Des Moines Rapids then had to deal with the Rock Island Rapids, about 110 miles further up the river. And the Rock Island Rapids extended for 13 miles, but they were only 18 to 20,000 years old. And on this map, the white in amongst the gray are the different channels that you could navigate, but they had sharp edges that if you hit, could sink a boat. On August 28, Pike found James Aird, a Scottish-born fur trader, camped at the foot of the Rock Island Rapids. A rock had breached the hull of Pike's keelboat, so he had to unload it and tip it over and repair it. And after having breakfast with Aird, Pike headed up the rapids and immediately lost his rudder. And while fixing it, a strong wind came up. Once back on the river, the frustrated and impatient Pike raised his sail, and he admitted, although total strangers, we sailed through them with a perfect gale blowing all the time. Had we struck a rock, we probably would have bilged and sunk. He continued his reckless ascent despite meeting two more of Aird's boats stranded on those rapids. This was the natural Mississippi River during the heyday of steamboating. This was the river before the Corps of Engineers would start improving it. This was the river of Mark Twain. In 1866, following the Civil War, Congress responded to the increasing demand for navigation improvements and authorized the Corps to begin removing snags, overhanging trees, and sunken vessels, and to start dredging the troublesome bars. The Congress directed the Corps to create a 4-foot channel. They wanted to connect all those dark blue areas with a channel at least 4 feet deep if the river got to as low as it was in 1864. That's the benchmark here. Our 9-foot channel today is based on the 1864 low water year as well. Under the 4-foot channel project, the Corps first began changing the river's character. But the Corps simply didn't have the equipment, the funding, or the authority to make really significant changes. The river could undo anything the Corps did to it with a single flood and re-scramble everything. The increasing number of farmers and merchants in the Midwest recognized that for the Corps really to make substantial and permanent changes, Congress was going to have to authorize a much more substantial project. During the 1870s, they began pushing for a new project. Following the Civil War, more and more railroads began crossing the Mississippi, and more railroads were paralleling the Mississippi. And they were charging such high rates that farmers joined an organization called the Grange, or Patrons of Husbandry, by the tens of thousands. The Grangers insisted that the Midwest needed a navigable Mississippi River to compete with the railroads and keep those rail rates down. Bosse presents most of the railroad and wagon bridges crossing the upper river. Cities on the upper Mississippi also pushed for navigation. As railroads took away passenger and commercial traffic, the communities began to decline. They had depended on that river commerce for their prosperity. And I'm going to show a series of these images of towns. What I want you to get across is Bosse's showing you all these towns because they're the ones who the project is for. But also I want to show you how he photographs them. Bosse documented these towns, capturing some as pioneer settlements and others as commercial centers. And these photographs really demonstrate his artistic talent. The cities include St. Paul, Prescott, Wisconsin, and Dresbach, Minnesota. In his book, Mark Twain's America, Bernard DeVoto sets the tone for what life might have been like in these towns. He wrote that when someone saw a steamboat approaching, the town woke and went to the wharves to touch the infinite. This was pageantry, he declared, for the rivers were the conduits of the national adventure, and the Mississippi River was fable itself given life. He could have been writing about Genoa, Wisconsin. Here, Bosse has the man laying with the slope and with the fence, taking you down to the right side of the image, and the railroad takes you back in, and then it turns and brings you out. And the railroad actually connects with the landscape in the distance, creating a perfect parabola. And look at the geometry of this image. I wish I could be out there with you, because what I tell you is you follow that sandbar up to the man whose head is right at the horizon, then you continue up the bluff, and you can kind of see there's a light side of the bluff and a dark side. And right up that line comes right down through the sandbar. You can see 2 dark triangles and 2 light triangles. So he's setting up that geometry of this image with the man right in the middle. Here are 3 images from Fountain City, Wisconsin. In Life on the Mississippi, Twain mused, "The majestic bluffs that overlook the river along through this region charm one with the grace and variety of their forms and the soft adornment of their beauty. The steep verdant slope, whose base is at the water's edge, is topped by a lofty rampart, turreted rocks, which are exquisitely rich and mellow in color. And then you have the shining river winding here and there and yonder, its sweep interrupted at intervals by a cluster of wooded islands threaded by silver channels. It is all as tranquil and reposeful as a dreamland, and has nothing this worldly about it, and nothing to hang a fret or a worry upon," as this image from Trempealeau, Wisconsin suggests.
I think you're 1 slide behind.
Am I?
Yeah.
Thank you for telling me that, because I look, there we go. There's the silver channels. Thanks for catching me. Don't hesitate. If there's something that you don't get, let me know. It doesn't bother me at all. So in these photographs, I'm going to show you again how intentional Bosse is. Like this one with Muscatine. He's got the guy bending over so his back, he doesn't break that horizontal horizon. Here's another example. he's got the man bending over to not break the horizontal horizon. And then I want to show you this one quick. I got to zoom in. He's got two men standing there. One's bending over, the other one's holding oars, and the oars are level with the horizon line. So again, he's directing people on how he wants to set up these images. The increasing cry from the river cities and farmers finally led Congress to authorize the 4.5-foot channel in 1878. It was only a half-foot different from the 4-foot channel, but it was going to introduce the greatest changes in the Mississippi River since the glaciers retreated. Under this project, the Corps was to create a permanent channel at least 4.5 feet deep at low water from St. Paul to just above St. Louis. In Life on the Mississippi, Mark Twain quipped about the project. The military engineers of the commission have taken upon their shoulders the job of making the Mississippi River over again, a job transcended in size only by the original job of creating it. Bosse's photographs document this project in the river at the time the Corps was building it. To create the 4.5-foot channel, the engineers would continue dredging and snagging that they'd already begun. And they would get the dredge Phoenix and the snag boat General Barnard. But as I've showed you, dredging and snagging could be undone by the river in no time at all. So what the Corps had to do is they had to start constricting the river with wing dams. And what the wing dams did, it was like by narrowing the river, it's like narrowing the faucet on a garden hose or turning your dial to that jet setting. And by going faster, the river could carve through the sandbars. And once it's suspended, you take a glass of water, put some sediment in it, and you shake it up, it goes up in the column, right? And so that's what they wanted those wing dams to do, is narrow it, stir up that sand, and then when it went between the wing dams, it would slow and settle out. One engineer said it was as much about growing the banks as it was about narrowing the Mississippi River. And Bosse's photographs detail the construction of these wing dams and how they reshaped the river. He shows you where they cut the saplings to make the brush mats. He shows you towing the brush to the wing dam site and then laying that brush mats into the river. Look at how Bosse staged this photo. He has all the lines coming down into the middle. And then he's got the men holding the brush in line with the horizon and the bluff in the distance and back. Alberta Kircher Hill spent 17 summers with her father's fleet as they built the wing dams. From the building boat, she recalled, I could even smell the delightfully blended odor of the willows and of the creosoted marlin twine which held the bundles together. It came to me every time the men hoisted a swishing bundle of brush to their gunny sack protected shoulders. For rock, the Corps contracted with quarry operators along the river, like at Rickman's Quarry at Fountain City. This is another image where we see Bosse's intentionality. You see how he matched the horizon across the top line? He cheated. He painted or bleached in the top inch of that image on the right side so that he could meet and make that horizon line continuous all the way across. He also creates a vertical access. There's a pine tree, a shed, and then the edge of the bluff. And he creates a vertical access through those. And so he's creating these different geometry within these images. Alberta Kircher Hill recalled that no sooner had the barge of rocks been pulled up to the dam than the symmetry of the load was destroyed as the men began the routine of sinking the mat. From the quarter boats, you could hear the big rocks hitting each other like a rapid-fire rage. As the mat went down under the load, a splashing began, and the sound grew in intensity as the mat sank lower and lower in the water. They would build the wing dams up layer by layer. The two top images on the right here show this layering of the rock and brush. The mattress is on the left side, and then you can see shore protection in the lower right. And then the lower left, again, shows the construction of the wing dam in layers as well. Wing dams depended upon the volume of water in the river. There's always someone at the spigot turning down, nature was turning down the volume of water in the Mississippi River. And all those pesky islands were diverting water away from the main channel into backwaters. To deliver more water to the main channel, the engineers built these closing dams. And the closing dams ran from the shore to an island or from one island to other. They wanted to direct all that water to the main channel. And what Bosse does in this image is he shows you this closing dam that the water's higher on the left side than the lower on the right side, because both men have their feet at the water's edge, and you can see how different it is. At Pine Bend, just below St. Paul, we see both wing dams and a closing dam. And now the wing dams are draining the river out the middle, and that closing dam has shut off that backwater, and that huge sandbar has now formed behind the closing dam. Because wing dams directed all the river's current across the river to the next bank, it would start undermining that bank unless the Corps protected it. To summarize the project in Life on the Mississippi, Twain wrote, they are building wing dams here and there to deflect the current, and dikes to confine it to narrower bounds, and other dikes to make it stay there. And for unnumbered miles along the Mississippi River, they are felling the timber front back for 50 yards with the purpose of shaving the bank down to the low water mark with the slant of a house roof and ballasting it with stones. And in many places, they have protected the wasting shores with rows of piles. Bosse also documents work at the Des Moines Rapids. Wing dams wouldn't work here because there was that rock bottom. So they had to build locks and a canal that would bypass the rapids. In his photographs, Bosse has shown you two things you rarely see done so well in concert. He shows you exactly how the Corps of Engineers went about building a navigation project. He provides you with the information. And he has done so while carefully and intentionally crafting works of art, demonstrating his concern for aesthetics at the same time. Another reason Congress authorized the 4.5-foot channel project was for the river's principal commerce, timber. Lumber rafts dominated commerce on the upper river from the 1870s to the first decade of the 20th century. Bosse documents the timber industry's use of the river, and raft boats such as these delivered timber to mills all along the upper Mississippi. A typical raft carried about 2.5 million board feet of lumber. That was enough to build 125 houses and covered about 3 to 5 acres. How much of the towboat fleet covered today? 15 barge. Do you know how many acres that covers, Lee?
I don't know about acres, but each barge is about 200 feet long and 35 feet wide. So
don't ask me to do the math, okay? But I'll say this, Lee.
But you got to have a hell of a set of lungs to yell at somebody on the head of the toe.
Yeah. So before the industry ended, one boat pushed 10 million board feet of lumber down the river. That could build 500 houses and cover 12 to 16 acres. Up in this region, Twain observed in Life on the Mississippi, we massed acres of lumber rafts coming down, but not floating leisurely along in the old-fashioned way, manned by joyous and reckless crews of fiddling, song-singing, whiskey-drinking, breakdown dancing rapscallions. No. The whole thing was shoved swiftly along by a powerful stern-wheeler, modern fashion, and the small crews were quiet, orderly men of a sedate business aspect, with not a suggestion of romance about them anywhere. The people here don't dream, he said, they work. While Twain thought the Corps of Engineers and the lumber industry had stolen romance from the river, some of Bosse's photographs do resonate poetically or romantically, such as this one from the bluffs at Fountain City. You can see all the rafts along the shore and then the one being pushed in the middle. Overall, 1.6 to 2.1 billion board feet of lumber moved into and on the upper Mississippi River each year between 1892 and 1900. After turning out 2 billion board feet in 1901, mills steadily declined. The sawmills and raft boats fell with the forests of Minnesota and Wisconsin. At its peak, during 1893 to 94, the lumber industry employed about 100 raft boats and 100 sawmills on the upper river. The number of sawmills dropped to 36 by 1903 and to 1 by 1913, that being at Fort Madison, Iowa, in this image. Raft boats followed a similar decline. Of the 20 that remained in 20 remained in 1906, and in 1915, the Ottumwa Belle guided the last lumber raft down the Mississippi River to Fort Madison. Each of Bosse's photographs tells us something about the history of the upper Mississippi River. As an album, his work constitutes an essay on the development of the river and the region. They documented the principal obstacles, how the Corps was trying to reshape the Mississippi River for navigation, and why Congress authorized the project for who the projects were for. But Henry Bosse did not simply document the river. He captured it in a way no photographer of his era did. He captured it with such artistic skill that he's being touted as one of the greatest photographers of his time. As my many quotes show, he illustrated with photographs what Twain presented in words. His views on the Mississippi River pair seamlessly with Twain's life on the Mississippi. So who was Henry Bosse? How did he come to take these photographs, and where did he learn his skills? Bosse served as a chief draftsman for the Rock Island District of the Corps of Engineers from 1878 until his death in 1903. According to his gravestone in Davenport, Iowa, he was born in Magdeburg, Prussia, or Germany, on the estate of his grandfather, General Neithard von Gneisenau, on November 13th, 1844. Gneisenau was the Prussian Army's principal military strategist between 1813 and 1815, and he played a pivotal role in the defeat of Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. That's Bosse's grandfather. After studying Latin, Greek, classical art, and engineering, Bosse left Germany in about 1870. In that year, the U.S. Census lists him as a resident of Chicago, where he operated a book, card, and stationery shop with a fellow German immigrant. In 1874, he joined the Corps to work on Great Lakes Harbor improvements. But there's an 1875 St. Paul City directory that says he's in St. Paul working for the Corps of Engineers in St. Paul. There he worked for Major Francis Farquhar, making maps such as this one. But in 1878, the Corps assigned Farquhar to the Rock Island District to begin work on that 4.5-foot channel project on the Mississippi River, and Farquhar probably convinced Bosse, knowing his skills in mapping, to come with him. Building on earlier maps and his own detailed survey of the upper river, Bosse and his assistant A.J. Stillboat completed a 27-page map of the upper river that would be published between 1887 and 88. Bosse and Stillboat depicted the ideal navigation as a continuous dashed line. They showed all the bars and sloughs and chutes. They provided the profile and dimensions of the bridges crossing the river. On their map are Dead Man's Bar, Mechanic's Rock, Horseshoe Bend, Whiskey Chute, Dark Slough, Demarest Bayou, and Otter Chute, the one in that closing dam image I showed you. Key landmarks also appear along the river, like Chimney Rock, Eagle, Queens, and Atchafalaya Bluffs. Most steamboat landings are on the map, as are ferry crossings. Bosse and Stillboat penned in nearly every river and virtually every creek entering the river. From their artistic drawings, you can see where the river closes in on the Mississippi, the bluffs close in on the Mississippi, and where the floodplains run away from it. Drawn at a scale of 1 mile to the inch, these would be the major navigation charts until the 1930s. By working on this survey and illustrating the maps for it, Bosse must have become intimately familiar with the geometry and all the moods of the Mississippi River. He wove photography and cartography together. He died in 1903 after some suspect eating a bad can of asparagus, which sent him to the hospital. While there, he seemed to get better, but he turned for the worst, and as they prepared him for surgery, he died of a heart attack. He was only 59 years old. His fellow workers in the community clearly held him in high regard, as is revealed in his obituaries. The Rock Island Argus proclaimed him one of the cultured, well-known, and highly regarded men of the city. The Rock Island Daily Times declared, "In Rock Island, Mr. Bosse was one of the best known and most respected citizens, and his loss to the city will be keenly felt." And the Rock Island Moller Volkszeitung, a local German language newspaper, praised Bosse as a craftsman of the highest order and one of the most knowledgeable men of the Mississippi River's topography. He so impressed his fellow workers that they named one of their steamboats the Henry Bosse after him. Knowing his heritage from General Gneisenau, given his stern and serious appearance, and since some obituaries describe him as having a distinct military and aristocratic bearing, Bosse seems to have been a pretty serious man. But despite this facade, he had a much lighter side. Harkening back to his days at the Chicago Card and Stationery Shop, Bosse produced a number of sketches that tell us much about his character and sense of humor. For example, look at this Christmas card of a Huckleberry Finn character holding a drafting pen. And I say Huckleberry Finn because it's likely that Twain influenced him with his books Life on the Mississippi, Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. We know Twain traveled on board the General Barnard in 1882, and Bosse likely might have met Twain on the boat. Mike Connor, the man who sold his album at Sotheby's, owned this image of this little sketch. And he brought it to the researchers at the Mark Twain Project at the University of California, Berkeley. And they confirmed that Bosse's caricature appears to be taken from illustrations in the original edition of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The sketch combines a face from E.W. Campbell's drawing with the clothing to that similar to Tom Sawyer's band of robbers. It seems we could slide Bosse's character into the band of robbers with the caveat that the drafting pen is more mighty than the wooden sword here. What if you received this invitation to a dinner party at Henry Bosse's house? You could expect a pretty wild time, but nothing like being invited to play cards. This is an invitation to come to his house to play cards. It says, "You are cordially invited to take a little hand in a whist tournament to be held at my hostelry this evening at 8 p.m. I wish I knew what he wrote to then Colonel Mackenzie on the inside of this card. In this whimsical sketch may represent how Bosse viewed himself better than anything else. Along the bottom, it says, down the Mississippi River from St. Paul to Grafton. That was the area of the reach that Bosse was mapping. Bosse, of course, sketched serious matters, such as the image of this work at the Rock Island Rapids. Here they've enclosed part of the rapids with a cofferdam, and they're blasting out the worst parts of the rapids. We also know that Bosse dabbled in painting, as with this painting of General Mackenzie. And we keep finding out more about him. Ken Spading, who works for the St. Paul District of the Corps, provided me with photos of paintings by Bosse, owned by a descendant of Bosse's wife. Bosse never had any children. This is The Flight of Time, and this is one with a woman what appears to be a church scarf, I'm told, on top of her head. And with Kenton's help, I discovered and verified this Bosse painting, clearly representing his training in classical art, The Birth of Venus. I'm sorry I don't have a better image of it. I couldn't find one. And then Bosse demonstrates even more what he's thinking about as a photographer in the Rock Island collection. So here's a series of images from the Rock Island collection. Starburst pattern around St. Anthony Falls. A round circle for the steamboat St. Paul. Crochet pattern around the wing dam image. Full 11 by 14 image of the East Bridge in St. Louis. This ornate pattern around Fort Snelling. Concave corners around, or rounded corners on this image of the G.J. Park, and then indented corners of a view of St. Paul from Mounds Park. And look at this image more carefully. You see the clouds and how they mirror the sandbars? He again cheated. He painted in those clouds. They're washed in. And they kind of create a parabola that goes around with the bend by the way he's positioned the clouds. So again, he's having to paint in elements where he wants to complete his composition. In the debut collection, there's a 2-page foldout and a 4-page foldout. And I have to tell you, this is not on the river. But we keep finding out new things. This is a more recent discovery. Now that I have a chance to get back to my roots as a historian, I followed up on a lead that made no sense. And I finally thought, I'm going to try to make sense of this lead. And it brought together I spent half of my federal career, almost 20 years with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the other half with the National Park Service. And this brings together both careers. The St. Paul District of the Corps played a key role in road and bridge building in Yellowstone in the 1880s, beginning in 1883. The lead I had hinted that Bosse may have been part of the Frederick Schwatka and F.J. Haynes winter expedition to Yellowstone in 1887. Schwatka was a famous polar explorer and was going to lead and organize the expedition. Haynes is one of Yellowstone's most famous photographers. Schwatka also lived in Rock Island, and he engaged Bosse to be the expedition's sketch artist. Schwatka convinced the Northern Pacific Railroad to help fund the expedition as a way to promote the railroad and visitation to Yellowstone. And he secured an agreement with Joseph Pulitzer's New York World newspaper and the Century magazine to publish the stories of the adventure in Haynes' photographs and Bosse's sketches. Schwatka, however, fell seriously ill when they were in Yellowstone. And there's an account of the trip that says, there would be no stories in the New York World with Henry Bosse's artwork, nor would there be any Haynes illustrated article published in the Century magazine. The explorer returned empty-handed. The fame of Haynes, however, would just continue to go up as one of Yellowstone's photographers. What do you think Bosse and Haynes talked about on those cold winter nights? Do you think Haynes taught Bosse something about photography, maybe, that Bosse would then take into his later photographs? No one knows what happened to Bosse's sketchbook. Can you imagine what that would be worth at auction today? Or historically, if we had that? If Henry Bosse's cyanotypes only documented an important transition in the history of the Mississippi River, they would still be worthy of much recognition. However, his work is not merely that of a draftsman charged with documenting a Corps of Engineers project. It is the work of an artist. Bosse's photograph demonstrated his sophisticated sense of composition, and they depict not only the great natural beauty of the river, but the fascinating geometries of industrial developments, such as bridges and locks. We didn't discover just a set of photographs. We discovered the talents of a man who combined photography, cartography, and painting to document the transformation of one of the world's greatest rivers. So like Bosse, I hope after this talk that you can look at both elements of the river's landscape, the natural and the human-made, and look for the artistry in both. And I hope you consider how much has the river really changed and how much it might still be similar to what the one Bosse photographed. So that's my talk on Henry Bosse. I hope it was a surprise going from when I first found out about these in 1990 to where they stand today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, John.
Do you have a better appreciation of what these are now?
Oh, absolutely. Can't thank you people enough for showing up. When volunteer groups put these kind of things on, we're always terrified that nobody will show up. We packed the house, and Captain Lee Hendricks is sitting in the King's chair over here. He will be our presenter on June 6th. The volunteers around the room will kind of make this stuff disappear. Please spend some time here. Charlotte's been with us all day. Mary Pat was here yesterday. Tom and Linda have been around for a couple days. And I know a lot more history right now than when I walked in this morning.
And I'll stick around if anybody has questions.
Absolutely. And so one of the reasons I do this, every day I'm here, when I walk out, I know more history than when I walked in. The people who come in are curious, they're intelligent, and they have stories. And for human beings, our history has been conveyed by storytellers for tens of thousands of years. They keep history alive. So, can't thank you enough. Be well and do good things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. I mean,